I am a big believer in asking for warm interest for two pieces. One is obviously to expand out the access to get more bets with investors for sure. But there's another thing is that I want the investor to be challenged to work for the company, right? So I want them to put their social capital in the company and say, I trust this business. I believe in this business because one of the realities in this environment is that a lot of the rounds are going to come from bridge rounds. So you have to be so tight with your investors. They have to feel like they're part of the story of the business. If they're not part of the story of the business, it's not going to work for you. So I think the swarm is actually doing something very fascinating for me. Again, if the way I see it is that it's basically having a more effective way of how the investors can be part of the story of the business. I have a boutique investor advisory service specifically for climate tech companies. And usually in the pre-seed to A stage. Now, the way that I personally got involved in this, actually, I came from the background as I had a large catering company, and it was a kosher catering company and the kosher proteins are very expensive. So I was introduced to the world's first biotech accelerator. It's first the largest, called IndieBio, which was incubating some of the most exciting technologies that we actually have heard of today. Some of the leaders in cell-based meat, for example, Upside is a company that was incubated in that accelerator. And when I met those companies, I said, "This is the future. I want to be part of this story because I personally know it so well. Like I want to make sure that we have ethical, affordable access to create food, and I want to make sure we have a climate that can support my kids for the future. So that's why I'm focused specifically on climate tech. And to highlight, in Israel itself, I am director of sales development for the Israel's most active pre-seed fund called Fusion, and they are the first check. The first check in a company is usually this fund, right? So they invest typically, let's say, around $250,000 at around a $2 million valuation, typically primarily software. And what I noticed, as soon as you got pre-seed funding from a VC, you're in a roller coaster. And once you're on that roller coaster, you need to make sure that you're already thinking about your next round of funding. So I took my passion for climate that came from my own personal running a food company, being a kosher consumer who wanted to make sure I have access to great, affordable, ethical food. And I also took my experience from working with a VC and understanding the mentality of early stage founders. So that as soon as they get funding, they need to raise funding immediately. I said, I think there's an opportunity here to basically build a boutique investor advisory service specifically for those founders. So I'll share with you just kind of my own mentality about network building. I used to host a lot of Shabbat dinners in my home, Friday night dinners, and I had a rule for whenever somebody would come to my home, I would say, "You can only come back if you bring somebody new." It was in tongue in cheek, but it was that notion of I want to be surrounded by great people having great conversations, and usually great people surround myself by other interesting people. That's why I would have someone come to my home for dinner. And then at the end of that dinner, I would say, I'd love to come back, but you know, my rule is if you come back, bring somebody else new so we can learn more from them. And I think that is something that I've carried over in a lot of my interactions. Investors primarily, and that's they are their goal is to find deals. We think that as companies, we're in this position of where we're seeking investment. But if you think about an investor, they're running their own business, and their product is you, right?
Hmm.
So if their product is you, they want to make sure to talk to you. The
Hmm.
question is, they just don't know about you yet. But if you fit their mandate, it's their fiduciary duty to talk to you. That if you fit their mandate. So the notion of kind of how I approached it was initially I said, look, let me go out to say these are the top investors in this climate tech field. That's why, by the way, I decided to be in a niche because there's only at different stages, there's only a limited set of investors that can play in that stage. So let me have some initial conversations. I would always ask at the end of the conversations, hey, who do you respect as well? Which one of your peers do you respect as well? And can you make an intro for me? I would love to learn from them. Right? So that kind of notion of understanding the investor has their interest to do their fiduciary responsibility to find great companies. You're helping them do that. Number two is investors often co-invest with others. They're not going to be able to take the whole round. So they already know all the players in their field. There's a tremendous degree of trust between each other because they often bring each other on the deals. So they know exactly who else they should talk to. So the intros are very simple. What I was doing, what you guys are doing in your services, I was doing manually already, and I think most individuals in my type of services, they're doing this manually. They're essentially saying, look, let me look at your LinkedIn connections. Let me understand. For example, I had a cell-based company out of Israel that we're looking to understand who their investors know. How do we do that? Well, we basically had a set of funds, and we looked through. I mean, it was nutty. I was basically searching through second-degree connections on Sales Navigator of a certain connection, or I was asking to get access to the LinkedIn of the investor and log into the LinkedIn, their private LinkedIn, to get. It's like it was a mess. It was a very uncomfortable process. And by the way, and then what would happen? I would do all this efforts, and then it's actually just a really superficial LinkedIn connection. There's nothing here. So I couldn't even layer up because no investor would give me access to their Gmail. That would never happen, right? That's very complex. And if you think about an investor like Guy, for example, his portfolio, he has 15 companies every quarter they invest in. 15 companies every quarter, $250,000. And in this pre-seed stage, you're betting on a lot. You're doing a ton. Or seed stage, you're not in growth mode where you'll take 5, 6 winners and really try to build them up. And then these founders, they're all asking for intros from Guy. So he becomes a bottleneck. It's a really tough thing. So why I'm passionate about what you're doing is you took what I've done much better than me. That was the first conversation you and I had. I said, wait a second, you're much better than what I'm doing. I'm just going to switch. Because there was a realization of LinkedIn itself is very superficial of a layer. Two is to get on a call with your investors and go through their entire intro is very demanding when an investor may have a large data set of portfolios. You need to basically go up and already have so much already prepared for them so you can just activate. You cannot take a lot of time, especially the earlier stage rounds. So, and you've done that. Email providers are really taking a very strong position on basically allowing the user, the prospect, to take more control and actually basically blacklist your domain. Once the domain is blacklisted, what that means is that you're sending an email and nobody sees it. Not good. That is not good at all. So what does that mean for the industry? That means email, unless it's already been warmed through a connection, is very risky now. Every email you send that's not, let's say, invited, that creates risk for the business exposure. So what's going to happen is more people are going to be pushed towards LinkedIn, which is going to become even more spammy. It's already super spam. Now email has been, hurt as its cold channel. So LinkedIn is going to become a place where you're going to have chatbots, which you're already seeing already, and sequencers, because they haven't put a stop on it yet. So why am I highlighting this? Is, well, again, this goes back to why what you're doing is so important for me, is that if I can know someone who had an email exchange in the past, that means the chances of that email landing into mailbox when it's a referral is going to be much higher. Right? You're getting attention when otherwise you might not have in the past. And Sales Navigator can't do that. When I look at second-degree connections of my investors, I don't know if the quality of that connection, I don't know if they had an email exchange, I have very little visibility into that. Not very effective. Introductions are really important for sure, but actually, what's really interesting is I like leveraging investors to close deals, and the way they do that is it's basically alignment, where we say to the investors, say, look, we're in fourth conversation due diligence. We seem like we have a timeline from them. We seem like that there is there's an interest there. What at this point is I'd like you to align with the MD, so the managing director of the fund. So what I'm going to ask from my champion in the fund, say, at this point, I'd like you to speak to our lead investor because of two reasons. A, I think you'd feel more confident and comfortable coming into this deal knowing who else you're sitting on the cap table with. And the second thing is that he has his own responsibility to his investors to make sure qualify the deals. So he wants to make sure that the timeline is aligned. Like what you're thinking is, so that executive to executive conversation on the investor side is extremely powerful. You can move things very quickly that the CEO cannot move. Because if you think about the way I explain it, if you think about a sales cycle in investment, and I think this is actually quite interesting. I haven't seen too many people talk about it. The CEO is the AE, but actually the investors on his cap table is the executives. So when you want, because the CEO is always the one selling it's very hard for anybody else to sell around, or especially early stages, but the CEO. It's a very unique thing, is because you can have an AE sell the product, but I'm not gonna say it's impossible. I would say it's nearly impossible unless you're the CEO to raise the money. It's nearly impossible. So you're actually the AE. Now, when you're in the AE, you need to leverage other people to bring into the deal. Like an AE would bring in the CEO to align with the CEO of the business to make sure that there's executive alignment, and then we can bring it down. So that's how I find most important, actually. The investors, the interest is important, but I want them to close the deal for the business.